All right. The other side of this coin is the seller. There's a seller side to this as well. What do you think the seller's main interest is? Money, money, money. It's my money and I want it now. That J.G. Whitworth or whatever. I want the cheddar. Nothing worse than walking into a closing and you hear the words, well, it's a dry closing today. Dry closing means that the lenders for the buyer, the new lender, hasn't sent the money to the closing table. So no one gets paid yet. Always hate that. You got to wait. It's called a dry closing. Yeah. Means we'll go ahead and, Michael or Miguel, let it go, dude. Money passing has nothing to do with ownership. But the question you're asking is, it's not really final because they don't do all of it. All right? In a dry closing, both sides sign, and when is deed passed? Delivered and accepted. So what happens is the title work never hands it out on a dry closing. They're going to sign all the documents and they'll just stand there and hold it. So they never give it away, so it's never accepted. So what they do is, in a dry closing, you just sign. So, hey, you're already here. Sign all your paperwork. Right? And then when the money comes in, then they go, oh, and here's the deed. So the question is, it hasn't, no, it's not transferred, but it's not transferred because the title company doesn't finish the deal. They stop about 10% of the way left to go. But anyway, seller's concern wants money. Go in, sit down, bring it in. Now, there are a couple things in this chapter you guys are going to have to understand and think slightly different. In the buyer, the loan is actually a credit to a buyer. Everybody thinks it's a debit because I owe money. After you sign the paperwork, you owe money. But before you sign the paperwork and Fifth Third says, Raymond, you're approved for $100,000, that's my money. So the loan is actually a credit to a buyer. All right? So that's the money we're talking about coming in that has to get wired in. I had a really weird closing a number of years ago that I'm sure by the end of the day, there was a blonde that got fired somewhere. All right? Maybe that's wrong, but I'm telling you. I had the listing for Huntington Bank. I brought the buyer to the table. It was an Eagledale property. You guys know where Eagledale is? Up at it was 38th and Lafayette. Nice little cottage homes, 40, 50, 60, 70s, in that range. $63,000 home, Hispanic guy was buying it. Bank was selling it. We go to closing. First thing the title company says is, dry closing, money's not in yet. My client's like, well, that's rare. I gave my bank the wire transfer yesterday. So the guy at the title company says, don't worry, it'll probably be in the next hour. So we go through all the closing, do all the closing, yada, yada, yada. Guy goes up, goes back, says, I'll make copies. All of a sudden he comes back, he's like, dude, the wire's not in yet. So we're just going to stop right here and wait for the wire funds to come in. And the vice president of the bank was sitting there, and she said, I don't do dry closings. I'll sit right here until the money comes in. And she said, well, the guy at the title company said, you're more than welcome. You want a Coke? We got a popcorn machine. Have at it. And she pulled a book out of her purse and said, I'll sit right here. So she sits in this, so the buyer goes, you know, I got stuff to do. Can I go do something and come back? And I'm like, yeah, sure. 2.5 hours later, he comes back and he's like, what's going on? Title company's like, I have not the slightest clue why this is a dry closing. Hey, just throw that down. So she's like, this is very upsetting. And he goes, I don't know why it's so hard. The money's in your bank. And she said, what? He's like, yes, I use Huntington Bank. My $63,000 is sitting in Huntington. And she's like, well, hold on a second. So she calls back to the bank and she goes, what's your account number? So, is this got money in it? Move it to our account. What the girl at the bank was doing was trying to wire money from Huntington to Huntington and could never get the wire to go through. It's always busy when I call. The vice president sat for almost 3 hours while this young lady kept trying to ACH the money to her own routing number, which the feds don't like you to do because that looks like wire fraud. So she goes, move the money to our account. And the title guy goes, guess we're done, huh? And he goes, yeah, we're done. Out. But I tell you what, when she got back to the bank, somebody was going to get fired because she sat there almost 3 hours. And this girl kept going, I can't get the wire to go through. You're calling yourself. It's busy. Yeah. Huh? Yeah, that's what I said. She didn't recognize that she was sending to her own routing number and either didn't know it, didn't read it, didn't know. Maybe she was brand new to the routing, but couldn't get the wire to go through. And we only found out because my buyer client finally said, hey, it's in your bank. Why is it so hard? It's in your bank. And she's like, what? Hold on a minute. So the seller's other concern is making sure that they get the payoff and all of that to clear all the liens so that they can get off the tax record, they can release their liens and all of that. Now, what is your role as the real estate professional in all of this? You have a huge number one role. What's your biggest role in the closing? Bring me my money. No, that's not it. Now, your biggest role is basically to be there to assist your client. Make sure your client feels comfortable. There are many different states that have different rules, like Minimum Level of Services Act. Some require us to go to closing. Some don't require us to go to closing. In Indiana, you are required to go to closing. Now, I've told you and I've said this before, if you have done your job correctly, you are useless at closing. And that's a good thing. That's what you really want to be. When you go into closing, the closer is going to sit on that end, your client's going to sit close to them, and you're going to sit on this end of the table, and you're going to talk to the other agent and go, hey, how's it going? How's your business been? You been okay? Did you see the football game last night? Dallas scored 52 points. Oh, we're done? Let's go. Because you should have explained all the documents, got all the signatures, got everything you need. If you did your job correctly, you are useless at the closing because the closer will take over and all the documents have already been explained to your client, all of that. Now, if they're not and your client goes, hey, what's this mean? They're there just in case to go, oh, yeah, that's the lead-based paint form that says, remember that we talked about? Oh, okay, yeah, okay, good. All right. So you're there to answer questions. That's your number one thing. You're there to schmooze. On the way, technically you're walking out with a customer, right? Agency terminated, deed transferred. This is your last chance to say, hey, thank you very much. You got a friend. Here's 27 business cards. Pass them out. I'll treat them like they were my sister. Okay? And then bring me my check. The lender has an interest. The lender has an interest. The lender's interest is virtually the same as the buyer's. The lender wants to make sure that the liens got paid off so that they get first position. They're going to get copies of the survey to make sure that the size of the property they lent the money on. They're going to get the appraisal, all of that. So the lender's interest is virtually the same as the buyer. And their interest basically is to protect their interest, meaning their money, by making sure their lien will get placed in the public records. IRS has an interest, don't they always? They have an interest that the sellers may have to pay capital gains. Remember, 250 or 500 is free if they've lived there 2 out of 5 years. If they made more than that, this is the form that they will actually capture, because they will actually ask the seller, have you lived there the last 2 out of 5 years? Okay, yeah, we'll mark that. The buyer has to sign forms potentially because he's going to get some deductions off of his taxes down the road, like homeowner, the home exemptions and things like that. Tell you what, we're going to change the audio file.